Welcome to Greenlight Dreams. Tonight we begin one of the most beloved journeys in classic literature, a dreamy tale filled with imagination, curiosity, and wonder. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is softly narrated to help you relax, unwind, and drift into peaceful sleep. Now, let the story begin. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind as well as she could, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid. Whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be too late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it and hurried on, Alice stood up on her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it. Burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and fortunately was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment, down went Alice after it. "Curiouser and curiouser!" cried Alice, for she was so much surprised that for the moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet." For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. "Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can, but I must be kind to them," thought Alice. "Or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go." She folded her hands and began, "Dear little feet, I hope you'll remember me." But just then her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! She could only kneel down and look through into the garden with one eye, but to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry again. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. A great girl like you." But she went on crying all the same. Soon she heard a little pattering of feet, and she looked up eagerly, hoping it was the rabbit bringing her gloves and fan. It was the white rabbit, returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! She'll be savage if I've kept her waiting." When the rabbit came near Alice, he started violently, dropped both fan and gloves, and scurried away. Alice picked them up. As she fanned herself, she said, "How curious everything is today. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle." She tried to remember all the things she used to know. She began to repeat her lessons, but her voice sounded strange. While she was talking, she was surprised to find that she was shrinking. She had been holding the rabbit's fan and she dropped it quickly just in time. "I'm shutting up like a telescope again." And so it was indeed. She soon found herself so small that she was soon below 2 feet high. She ran to the little door, but alas, the little door was locked once more, and the golden key lay upon the glass table as before. Things were worse than ever, thought poor Alice, for the large hall, the glass table, and the little door all vanished, and she found herself suddenly slipping into a large pool of salt water. "Curiouser and curiouser!" cried Alice again, for she realized the pool of water was nothing other than her own tears, which she had cried when she was 9 feet high. She swam about, trying to find her way out. Soon she heard something splashing about in the pool near her. She swam nearer to make out what it was. At first she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was and realized it was only a mouse. "Would it be of any use to speak?" said Alice. So she began, "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I'm very tired of swimming about here." The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively but did not speak. "But perhaps it doesn't understand English," thought Alice. So she began again, speaking French. "Où est ma chatte?" The mouse gave a sudden jump. "Oh, I beg your pardon," cried Alice hastily. "I quite forgot you don't like cats." "Like cats?" cried the mouse in a shrill voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, perhaps not," said Alice in a soothing tone. "But I do wish I could show you our cat Dinah. She is such a dear, quiet thing." The mouse was trembling. "Let us get to the shore," it said, "and then I'll tell you why I dislike cats." So they swam on and got out of the pool. Alice and the mouse sat down together with a whole group of wet animals who had also fallen into the pool. A duck, a dodo, a lory, and several others. Alice waited eagerly for the mouse to begin. The mouse cleared its throat and spoke. "Sit down, all of you, and I will soon make you dry enough." And so the strange little council began. They were indeed a curious-looking party who assembled on the bank. The birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a long argument about it, and Alice listened patiently. In the end, the mouse, who seemed to be a person of some authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once, eyeing the mouse with great curiosity. "Ahem," said the mouse with an important air. "Why are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know." And the mouse began. "In ancient times, the land was ruled by William the Conqueror." Alice listened as well as she could, but it did not seem to dry her much. At last the dodo interrupted. "The best thing to dry us would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" asked Alice. The dodo paused thoughtfully. "The best way to explain it is to do it." It marked out a racetrack in a sort of circle. The party all stood around the circle, and the dodo called out, "Go!" They began running, at first slowly, then faster and faster, until everyone ran wherever they liked in no particular order. After about half an hour, the dodo suddenly cried, "The race is over!" They crowded around it, panting. "But who has won?" Alice asked. "Everybody has won," said the dodo, "and all must have prizes." Alice had no idea how to give prizes, but she put her hand in her pocket and found a box of comfits. The dodo handed them round, and they all had one. But the mouse seemed annoyed. The lory remarked, "I am older than you and must know better." But the mouse said sharply, "I wish you would not interrupt me." Alice humbly begged it to continue. The mouse folded its arms and continued in a solemn tone, "You insult me by talking of cats." "I didn't mean to," said Alice. "But I do wish I could show you our cat Dinah. She's such a beautiful creature." The mouse shuddered violently. "Let us change the subject," it said in a trembling voice. Alice immediately agreed. "Well, what do you think of dogs?" She added eagerly, "Our dog can fetch anything." The mouse jumped up in terror. "Dogs, cats, I can't bear them." and it hurried away through the grass. "Dear me," said Alice. "I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah." The other animals began to leave as well, grumbling as they went. Soon Alice was left alone again. She looked around sadly when suddenly she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned, hoping it was the mouse come back to finish its story. But it wasn't the mouse at all. It was a very curious creature who stared at her with great round eyes. It was the white rabbit, trotting slowly back again, looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something. Alice heard him muttering to himself, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! She'll be savage if I've kept her waiting." Suddenly his eyes fell upon Alice, and he called out in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne? What are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan." Alice was so startled that she ran off in the direction he pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake he had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am." Still, she felt curious to see the rabbit's house. So she soon reached a neat little cottage with the name W. Rabbit on a brass plate. She went inside without knocking. There was a small table in the hall on which stood a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white gloves. She took one pair and a fan and was just going to leave when she noticed a little bottle on the table. There was no label with "Drink Me," but she tasted it all the same. At once she felt herself growing larger again. She tried to stop, but it was too late. In a few moments she had filled the whole room. She had to kneel, then sit, then lie down with one elbow against the door and one arm curled around her head. "There," she said. "Now I can do no more. What will become of me?" Outside, the rabbit suddenly cried out, "Marianne! Marianne! Get me those gloves at once!" Then came the sound of little feet and scratching at the door. Alice said softly, "There's no use talking to them from here. I'm nearly as big as the house." Soon the rabbit called out to someone else, "Tell Bill to go down the chimney." Alice waited, and then she heard something sliding down inside. She thought, "That must be Bill. Well, I'll just give him a little kick." She drew back her foot as far as she could and gave a sharp kick up the chimney. There was a crash and something flew out into the garden. Voices outside cried, "Bill's gone!" and "Catch him! You must help him!" and "Hold up his head!" Then a chorus, "Let's burn the house down!" Alice called out loudly, "If you do, I'll send Dinah after you." At once there was silence. Finally, the animals began throwing pebbles through the window. The pebbles turned into little cakes as they hit the floor. Alice ate one, and immediately she began shrinking again until she was small enough to run out of the house. Outside, a shower of little animals were waiting for her, but Alice ran as fast as she could into the woods. "If I'm not mistaken," said Alice to herself, "the next thing will be something quite extraordinary." And she was right, for she was soon to meet a very strange creature who sat on a large mushroom in the forest. Alice looked all around her as she wandered through the forest, wondering what would happen next. Suddenly she came upon a large mushroom, almost as tall as she was. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom. Sitting on top of it was a large blue caterpillar, smoking a long hookah, taking slow, silent puffs and paying no attention to her or anything else. Alice and the caterpillar stared at each other for a while in silence. At last the caterpillar removed the hookah from its mouth and addressed her in a lazy, quiet voice. "Who are you?" Alice felt a little nervous. I hardly know, sir, just at present," said Alice. "At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" asked the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, said Alice, because I'm not myself, you see. I don't see, said the caterpillar. I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly, said Alice politely, for I can't understand it myself. Who are you? The caterpillar repeated. Alice was beginning to feel irritated. I think you ought to tell me who you are first, she said. Why? Said the caterpillar. Alice had no good answer, so she turned away. You're growing used to being different sizes, the caterpillar remarked.
Alice said, I think so. I've been many different sizes today. The caterpillar drew itself up proudly. It is very confusing, isn't it? It said. It is, Alice agreed. Recite, demanded the caterpillar. Alice tried to recite one of her
lessons, but the words came out all wrong. The caterpillar looked at her coldly. That is not correct, it said. Alice sighed. I'm afraid I'm not the same as I used to be. You'll get used to it, said the caterpillar calmly. There was a long silence. At last it spoke again. One side of the mushroom will make you grow taller, it said, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? Thought Alice. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, just as if Alice had spoken aloud. Then the caterpillar slid down from the mushroom and slowly crawled away into the grass. Alice remained standing by the mushroom, thinking over what had just been said. One side makes you grow, and the other makes you shrink. She broke off a piece from each side. She tried the first piece. At once her neck shot up like a tall stalk. Birds shrieked at her from above. She quickly took a bite from the other piece and shrank back to her normal height. Well, said Alice, at least I know how to manage myself now. She put the mushroom pieces carefully into her pockets and began to wander again through the deepening forest. For a minute or two, she stood looking at the strange house she had come upon. The chimneys were shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. As she approached the door, she heard a most extraordinary noise. Sneezing, howling, coughing, and the clash of plates and pans. She knocked timidly. The door was opened by a footman with a round face, nose nearly as long as his chin, dressed in a livery of blue and white. He stared at Alice solemnly but said nothing. Alice was not sure whether she should speak first, so she began. Please, may I come in? The footman only shook his head slowly. As they stood there, the door behind him flew open and a large plate came skimming out, almost hitting them both. We're expected to keep order, the footman remarked calmly. But the Duchess inside, well, she doesn't keep order herself. Alice stepped inside. The kitchen was full of smoke and pepper. So much pepper that everyone was sneezing constantly. At the center of it all sat the Duchess, cradling a screaming baby. A cook stood by the fire stirring something in a large cauldron and throwing in more and more pepper. Oh, please, there's far too much pepper in that soup, Alice cried. The cook glared at her and threw a ladle toward Alice, who barely dodged it. The Duchess spoke in a harsh voice. Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. Alice could not believe her ears. Why does your baby keep screaming? She asked. He's a pig, said the Duchess briefly. Alice blinked. What? A pig, repeated the Duchess. She suddenly thrust the baby into Alice's arms. Alice struggled to hold the wriggling, snorting creature. Its nose grew sharper. Its legs kicked wildly. Don't you think this baby is turning into something? Alice asked nervously. Most babies do, said the Duchess. And she hurried out of the kitchen. Alice looked down at the creature in her arms. Its little face was twisting, its snout growing longer. In another moment, it gave a loud grunt. Oh dear, cried Alice, you are a pig. She set the little creature down gently and it trotted off into the forest, sniffing the ground happily. Alice watched it go. "Well, I'm glad to be rid of it, that's certain," she said. As she walked away, she heard a soft purring above her. Alice looked up and saw the Cheshire Cat sitting on a branch of a tree, grinning down at her with a smile so wide it seemed to float in the air. The cat's eyes shone with mischief. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" Alice asked. "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. Alice felt a little vexed, but she tried again. "What sort of people live here?" "In that direction," said the cat, waving its paw, "lives a hatter, and in that direction lives a March hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad." "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice protested. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here." And the cat began to fade. First the tail, then the body, then the head, until only the grin remained. Alice stared at the empty space. "That's the most curious thing I ever saw in my life," she said. And with that, she walked on through the forest toward her next strange encounter. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March hare and the hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, leaning their elbows on it. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice, but it's asleep, so perhaps it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but they were all crowded together at one corner. "No room! No room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. "I don't see any wine," she remarked. "There isn't any," said the March hare. "Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it," said Alice. "It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March hare. The hatter opened his eyes wide. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" he asked suddenly. Alice was puzzled. "That's a riddle, I believe," she said. "Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer?" asked the March hare. "I think I can," said Alice. "Do you mean to say you can't?" said the March hare. The hatter shook his head sadly. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," added the dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the hatter. Alice sighed. "You're all wasting time," she said. "If you knew time as well as I do," said the hatter, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it. Time is a hymn." "I don't understand," said Alice. The hatter looked at her pityingly. "I dare say you never even spoke to time." "Perhaps not," Alice admitted cautiously, "but I know I must beat time when I learn music." "Ah, that accounts for it," said the hatter. "He won't do a thing if you beat him." Alice didn't know what to say to this. The hatter took a watch out of his pocket and shook it. "It's always tea time now," he sighed. "No time to wash the cups. We just move around the table." Alice looked around. The crowded corner, the piles of cups, the crumbs. It suddenly made sense. "So you keep moving from seat to seat?" she asked. "Exactly so," said the hatter. "But what happens when you come round again?" Alice asked. "Suppose we change the subject," the March Hare interrupted. "I vote the young lady tells us a story." "I am afraid I don't know any," said Alice. "Then the Dormouse shall!" they both cried. They pinched the Dormouse on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. "Once upon a time," the Dormouse said drowsily, "there were 3 little sisters, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well." "What did they live on?" asked Alice. "They lived on treacle," said the Dormouse. Alice protested that nobody could live on treacle. "If you can't be civil," the Hatter said, "then you may leave the table." Alice had had quite enough of the nonsense. "I think you might at least stop wasting time," she said angrily, and she walked away. As she left, she noticed a door in one of the trees. How curious, she thought. She opened it and found herself back in the long hall with the little glass table. "I knew I'd get back here," she said triumphantly. She took the golden key, ate a little piece of mushroom until she was just the right height, and walked through the little door into the beautiful garden at last. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses on it were white, but 3 gardeners were busily painting them red. Alice approached them curiously. "Would you tell me," she asked politely, "why you are painting those roses?" The gardeners looked at one another nervously. "You see, miss," said the one marked 2, "this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we planted a white one by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we'll all lose our heads." Alice was about to reply when she heard a loud cry. "The Queen! The Queen!" The gardeners threw themselves flat on their faces. Alice turned to see a grand procession approaching. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs, their bodies flat and shaped like playing cards. Then 10 courtiers, also card-shaped. Then the royal children, also playing cards. Then the King and Queen of Hearts. And last of all came the White Rabbit, looking anxious as ever. When the procession reached Alice, the Queen said sharply, "Who is this?" The rabbit whispered, "She's only a child." The Queen frowned. "Off with her head." "Nonsense," said Alice boldly. The Queen stared at her. "Do you play croquet?" she asked suddenly. "Yes," answered Alice. "Come on then," shouted the Queen. The croquet ground was the strangest thing Alice had ever seen. The balls were live hedgehogs, the mallets were flamingos, and the soldiers bent themselves down to form the arches. The game began at once, everyone playing at the same time, shouting, arguing, and running about wildly. Alice struggled with her flamingo mallet. Its long neck kept twisting around, looking into her face, then escaping under her arm. The hedgehog ball kept unrolling itself and crawling away. Meanwhile, the Queen was constantly shouting, "Off with his head! Off with her head! Off with everybody's head!" Alice began to feel extremely uneasy. Suddenly, she saw the Cheshire Cat's grin appear in the air. Then the rest of the cats slowly followed. "How are you getting on?" asked the cat. "I don't think they play fair," said Alice. "Of course they don't," said the cat. The Queen spotted the cat. "Off with its head!" she screamed. "But how can you cut off a head when it hasn't got a body?" asked Alice politely. The King agreed. The Queen disagreed. A great argument broke out about whether a bodiless head could legally be executed. While everyone was busy arguing, the cat slowly faded away, leaving only a floating grin. "It's gone!" cried the Queen. "Never mind, come on!" And she shouted, "Let the next witness be brought in." Alice followed reluctantly, wondering what strange thing was about to happen next. "You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing," said the Duchess, and she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's. Alice was very glad to see the Duchess in a much better temper. She walked along beside her through the garden. "You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk," said the Duchess kindly. "I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit." "Perhaps it hasn't one," Alice ventured to say. "Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it," said the Duchess. Alice wondered whether she would ever get used to the Duchess's habit of finding morals in everything. Suddenly, the Duchess pressed a little closer to Alice and whispered, "Flamingos and mustard both bite, and the moral is, birds of a feather flock together." Alice found this confusing, but before she could reply, the Duchess added, "Take care of the scents, and the sounds will take care of themselves." Alice didn't know what to make of this. Just then, the Queen appeared again, arms folded and scowling fiercely. "Either you or your head must be off." "Take your choice," the Queen snapped. The Duchess vanished instantly. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," the Queen said. She grabbed Alice by the hand and led her away. They arrived at a small seaside cliff. "Mock Turtle," the Queen cried. Then the Queen added, "Go with the Griffin. He will introduce you." Alice turned to see a strange creature with the head and wings of an eagle and the body of a lion, the Griffin. Its eyes gleamed curiously. "Come on," said the Griffin. "No use staying with the Queen, she always shouts." It led Alice to the edge of the sea where the Mock Turtle was sitting by himself, looking very sad. "This here young lady," said the Griffon, "wants to know your history." The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began, "Once I was a real turtle." He sobbed again. "When we were little," the Mock Turtle continued, "we went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle we used to call Tortoise." "Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one?" asked Alice. "Because he taught us," said the Mock Turtle indignantly. "Really, you are very dull." Alice felt too embarrassed to speak. "We learned French, music, and reeling and writhing, and then ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision." "What a curious plan," said Alice. "That's the reason they called the lessons lessons," said the Griffon, "because they lesson from day to day." Alice was silent, trying to understand. "And we had the best dances," said the Mock Turtle sadly. "First position, second position, and the lobster quadrille." "What is that?" Alice asked eagerly. The Mock Turtle sighed again. "You may not have lived much under the sea," he said. "Perhaps not," Alice replied. "Come, let us show you," said the Griffin. The Mock Turtle and the Griffin began to sweep around in a slow, sad dance, singing their strange underwater song. As they danced, Alice watched in wonder. Everything in Wonderland seemed to grow stranger and stranger. And soon the Mock Turtle said suddenly, "We must take you to see the trial." "The trial?" Alice repeated. "Yes," said the Griffin. "Come on." And they all hurried away. "Will you walk a little faster?" said a whiting to a snail. "There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail." The Mock Turtle sighed deeply. "You can't imagine how uncomfortable at ease that dance can be," he said. "But what is the lobster quadrille?" asked Alice. "Why," said the Griffin, "you first form into a line along the seashore." "With the lobsters," the Mock Turtle added. "Of course," said the Griffin. "Then you advance twice." "Each with a lobster as your partner," the Mock Turtle said. "Then you throw the lobsters," cried the Griffin, waving his claws excitedly. "As far out to sea as you can." Alice burst into laughter. "But must we really throw the lobsters?" she asked. "Of course," said the Griffin. "Shall we try the figure?" said the Mock Turtle. Let's try the first figure, said the griffin impatiently. The two strange creatures began dancing around Alice, lifting their feet slowly and gracefully, sometimes singing, sometimes humming thoughtfully. This is the lobster quadrille, the mock turtle said solemnly. Alice watched them dance, trying not to laugh. They moved as if underwater, slow and dreamy. Would you like to hear a song? Asked the mock turtle. Yes, please, said Alice. The mock turtle cleared his throat and began in a trembling voice. Turtle soup. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. The griffon joined in with a deep echo. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Alice listened politely, though she wasn't quite sure what to make of such a melancholy tune. When the song ended, she clapped her hands lightly. Thank you, she said. Shall we sing it again? Asked the mock turtle eagerly. No, said the griffon, who was watching the sky. It's time to go to the trial. The trial? Alice repeated in surprise. Come on, cried the griffin. They seized Alice by each arm and rushed off so quickly that she had no breath left to ask any questions. The mock turtle's sad voice faded behind them. Beautiful soup, so rich and green. On they ran, over rocks and sand, until the trees of a great forest rose ahead of them. And there, just beyond the woods, was the sound of a royal court in uproar. The trial was about to begin. The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when Alice and the griffin arrived. A great crowd had gathered around, birds, animals, and the whole pack of cards. In the middle of the court stood the Knave of Hearts, in chains with soldiers on each side of him. The White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and unrolled a scroll. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts all on a summer's day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict, the king said to the jury. Not yet, not yet, the rabbit interrupted quickly. There's a great deal to come before that. The first witness was called Alice. Alice stepped forward. The king adjusted his spectacles. What do you know about this business? He asked. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever? The king repeated. Nothing whatever, said Alice firmly. That's very important, said the king, turning to the jury. Unimportant, your majesty, said the White Rabbit. Important, unimportant, important, unimportant, muttered the jurors as they wrote hurriedly in their notebooks. The king waved his hand. Call the next witness. The White Rabbit blew another blast on the trumpet. The next witness was the Mad Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. I beg your pardon, your majesty, for bringing these in, he said nervously. But I hadn't finished my tea when I was sent for. You ought to have finished, said the king. When did you begin? The king asked. The Hatter looked at the March Hare who had followed him into the court. 14th of March, I think, the Hare said. 15th, said the Dormouse. Write that down, the king ordered. The Hatter trembled. I'm a poor man, your majesty, he began. You're a very poor speaker, said the king. Just then the Dormouse fell asleep and had to be pinched awake by the officers. The Hatter looked more and more frightened. You may go, said the king. The Hatter left the court in such a hurry that he lost his shoes. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the cook, the one who used too much pepper. She came in carrying a large pepper box. The court began sneezing violently. Give your evidence, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. "What do you know about these tarts?" asked the king. "Nothing," said the cook. "Then stand down," said the king. "One moment," the queen snapped. "Off with her." The cook vanished before she could finish the sentence. The king rubbed his hands. "This is the most important witness of all," he declared. Alice looked around curiously. "Who is the next witness?" she whispered to the griffin. But before he could answer, the white rabbit blew the trumpet for the third time and called out loudly. "Alice!" Alice gasped. "Here!" she cried. And everyone turned to stare at her. The king adjusted his spectacles once more. "Give your evidence," he said solemnly. Alice opened her mouth to speak. And at that same moment, she felt a strange sensation. She was growing larger again. "Here!" cried Alice, and she stepped forward boldly. As she spoke, she felt herself growing larger again. She tried to stop, but it was useless. In another moment, she had grown so tall that she knocked over the jury box with the edge of her skirt. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed, picking them up as fast as she could. "Not at all," said the king. "Consider your verdict," he added. "Not yet," said the rabbit quickly. "There's more evidence to come." "Read the next paper," said the king. The rabbit unfolded a small note and read, "They told me you had been to her and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character but said I could not swim." "That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet," said the king. "If any one of you can explain it, I'll give him 6 pence. If anyone can prove it nonsense, I'll give him a shilling." Alice could not help laughing. "That's nonsense," she said aloud. The entire court turned to stare at her. "Let the jury consider their verdict," the king repeated angrily. "No, no," said the queen. "Sentence first, verdict afterward." "Nonsense," said Alice loudly. "What's the use of a trial without a verdict?" "Off with her head!" the queen shrieked. Nobody moved. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." At this, the whole pack rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. Cards whirling in her face, falling on her arms, fluttering around her like a storm. Alice cried out, and then... Suddenly, she woke up. She was lying on the riverbank, with her head in her sister's lap. It was a warm afternoon, and the leaves were rustling gently above them. "Wake up, Alice, dear," said her sister. "You've been dreaming for a long time." Alice rubbed her eyes. "Oh, I've had such a curious dream." And she began to tell her sister all the strange adventures she had had. The White Rabbit, and the Cheshire Cat, and the Queen of Hearts, and all the wonderful creatures of Wonderland. Her sister listened, smiling gently. When Alice ran off to play among the leaves, her sister sat still for a while, thinking of the dream. She too seemed to see the little girl wandering through the strange halls, hearing the mad tea party and meeting the queen. At last she sighed, stood up, and walked homeward through the woods, but she kept the memory of Alice's adventures as a memory bright and strange as Wonderland itself.